In an abandoned village where the wind howled like a lost soul, Artyom lived in an old house with a slanted roof. He was over 50, but the years seemed to add another decade to his age. His face, jagged with birch wrinkles, seemed like stone, and his eyes were empty, like the winter sky. Once he had a family, a wife with a warm smile, a daughter with a ringing laugh, but life, like a harsh blizzard, took everything away. The wife died of illness, the daughter left for the city and stopped calling. Only Lyra remained, an old dog with fur, faded by time and eyes in which an inexplicable devotion glowed. Lyra appeared in the house 14 years ago. Artem's wife Svetlana brought her as a puppy without asking his consent. He then became indignant. Why do we need this ball of wool, this extra mouth? But Svetlana just laughed, stroked the puppy and said, "She will be our joy." Artyom grumbled, but eventually he got used to it. Lyra became a part of their life, and after Svetlana's death, the only living reminder of those days when the house was full of warmth. Lyra was old. Her paws shook as she climbed the creaky porch steps. Deafness settled in her ears, and she often did not hear Artyom calling her for a walk. Her movements were slow, as if each step required incredible effort from her. But she still looked at him with the same devotion, as if she wanted to say, "I'm here, I'm with you." Winter came early that year. Frost gripped the village and temperatures dropped to -degrees. The wind beat against the windows, and Artyom's old house seemed to groan under its onslaught. Lyra, as usual, lay curled up in a ball by the stove. Her breathing was heavy, but she still raised her head when Artyom passed by. He rarely looked at her. Life had left him as dry as cracked earth. He didn't talk to Lyra, didn't pet her, he only fed her, walked her and was silent. That evening, when the blizzard outside was especially loud, Lyra tried to get up. She limped toward the door, her paws slipping on the wooden floor. Artyom, sitting at the table with a mug of tea, noticed her movement. "Sit down, it's not the time," he muttered, not taking his eyes off the cracked mug. But Lyra didn't stop. She reached the threshold and, unable to restrain herself, left a puddle on the floor. This was not the first time. Her old body no longer obeyed as before. Artyom felt irritation boiling in his chest. He stood up, pushing his chair back sharply, and looked at Lyra. She lowered her head guiltily. Her eyes trembled as if apologizing. But Artyom didn't see this. He saw only a puddle, only extra work, only the hardships that Lyra brought to his already difficult life. "Enough," he said, and his voice was colder than the frost outside the window. "Go away." He opened the door, and an icy wind rushed into the house. Lyra looked at him without moving. Her gaze was full of something that Artyom could not or did not want to understand. He stepped towards her, grabbed her by the collar and pushed her out onto the porch. Blizzard immediately fell on her, covering her gray fur with snow. "Go," he shouted. "I can't take it anymore." Lyra did not bark or whine. She just turned and slowly walked away, stumbling over the snowdrifts. Her figure dissolved in the white haze until she disappeared completely. Artyom slammed the door. The silence in the house became deafening. He returned to the stove, poured himself some vodka from an old bottle and drank it in one gulp. His eyes were dry, but something inside ached, like an old wound. He brushed off the feeling, lay down on the bed and fell asleep to the howling wind. At night, he was awakened by the cold. A draft was creeping into the house, and Artyom, frowning, got up. The door was ajar, and apparently he had not closed it tightly. On the floor, by the threshold, he noticed a thin chain of footprints, small, almost imperceptible, with a reddish tint. Blood. Artyom's heart sank. He threw on an old jacket, lit a lantern and went out into the night. The blizzard had died down, but the frost still bit his skin. The beam of the lantern snatched Lyra from the darkness. She was lying motionless in the snow, right next to the porch. Her fur was covered with frost, and her eyes were closed. Next to her, pressed against her side, a tiny puppy was trembling. His body was so small that it seemed he would not survive the night. Artyom froze. His gaze darted from Lyra to puppy, and something in his chest snapped. He sank to his knees in the snow. Lyra wasn't breathing. Her body was cold as ice. But the puppy, weak and trembling, was still clinging to life. Artyom carefully picked it up in his arms. The little body was light, almost weightless. The puppy squeaked, burying its face in his palms. And then Artyom realized that Lyra hadn't just left, she had done something incredible. She had brought him this little bundle of life, as if she wanted to say, "Take care of it." "How did I take care of you?" Artyom's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, he pressed the puppy to his chest, feeling its warmth break through the numbness. Lyra had died, but her last act was full of love. She hadn't left him, even when he had turned away from her. And now, holding the puppy, Artyom felt something long forgotten ignite in him. Hope. Artyom sat by the stove, clutching a trembling puppy to his chest. His small body was so fragile that it seemed it could dissolve in his large, calloused palms. The frost outside still bit, but the house was warm. Too warm for the cold that had frozen Artyom's heart. He looked at the puppy, at its feeble attempts to move, and Svetlana's voice echoed in his head. She would be our joy. Lyra was their joy, and he had driven her out into the blizzard, into death. He carefully laid the puppy on the old blanket that Lyra loved so much. The puppy squeaked, trying to crawl, and Artyom felt a lump rise in his throat. He couldn't take his eyes off the door where Lyra lay. Her body was still there in the snow, as if it weren't my reproach. He wanted to go out to bring her into the house, but his legs wouldn't obey. Something inside him screamed, "It's your fault." And it was true. Artyom stood up. His movements were heavy, as if he was carrying his whole life on his shoulders. He took the lantern and went out into the night again. The frost burned his face, but he did not notice. Lyra was lying there by the porch. Her fur sparkled with frost under the light of the lantern. He knelt down next to her. His knees crunched in the snow. "Forgive me," he whispered, and his voice trembled. "Sorry, girl." He touched her cold fur, and the tears he had held back for so long flowed down his cheeks, freezing in the wind. He didn't know how long he sat like that next to her. The wind died down, and the night became eerily quiet. Only the faint squeak of a puppy from the house reminded us that life had not yet left this place. Artyom lifted Lyra into his arms. She was heavy, despite her old age and fragility. He brought her into the house and placed her on the floor of the stove next to the blanket where the puppy lay. "You shouldn't be out there in the cold," he muttered, though he knew she could no longer hear. The puppy, feeling the warmth, crawled closer to Lyra, as if seeking her protection. Artyom looked at this picture, and his heart was breaking. He remembered how Lyra, still young, ran around the yard, barked at sparrows, brought him an old ball that Svetlana threw to her in the grass. He remembered how his daughter, still little, hugged Lyra, laughing when she licked her face, and how Svetlana, already sick, stroked Lyra, whispering, "You look after him, girl, he's not as strong as he seems." Artyom covered his face with his hands. He didn't look after Lyra, he betrayed her. And now this puppy, this little bundle of life, was her last gift. But where did it come from? Artyom frowned, trying to remember. He knew that there were almost no dogs left in the village. Most of them left with the people when the village became empty. But somewhere under the old barn, where he carried unnecessary things, he sometimes heard rustling sounds. Could someone else have lived there? He stood up, wrapped himself in his jacket and took a lantern. He wrapped the puppy in a blanket and hugged him. He couldn't leave him alone in the house. The night was clear and the stars sparkled like shards of ice. Artyom reached the barn, which stood on the edge of the plot. The boards creaked under his steps, and he noticed that one of them was bent. He shone the flashlight and froze. Under the boards, in a makeshift shelter made from old rags and cardboard, lay a young dog. Her fur was dirty and her body was thin, but the eyes looked wary, but without fear. Next to her in the corner, 2 more puppies were scurrying about, weak but alive. But Artyom understood that Lyra knew about this dog. She must have shared her food with her. The same food he carelessly threw into her bowl. She took care of them, despite her old age, despite the pain in her paws, despite his indifference. And that night when he kicked her out, she didn't just go to die, she went to save. She pulled out one of the puppies, the weakest one, and brought it to him. To the man who turned away from her. He sank to his knees, feeling tears streaming down his cheeks again. The young dog looked at him. Her ears trembled, but she did not growl. It was as if she knew he would do no harm. Artyom extended his hand, and she carefully licked his fingers. "Did you love her too?" "Yes," he whispered, looking at the dog. The puppy in his arms squeaked, and Artyom felt something warm but painful flare up in his chest. It was hope mixed with guilt. He returned to the house carrying the puppy, and began to think about what to do. He couldn't leave the young dog and her puppies in the barn. Frost would have killed them, as it killed Lyra. But there was little space in the house, and he himself did not know how to take care of such little ones. Artyom looked at the puppy, who was now sleeping on the blanket, and realized that he couldn't just sit and wait. Lyra gave her life for this baby. He had to do something. He remembered his old neighbor, Maria, who lived 3 kilometers from his house. She was one of the few who remained in the village. Her house was small but warm, and she always kept chickens and cats. Maybe she would know how to help. Artyom wrapped the puppy up warmly, took a flashlight and set off. The frost nipped at his skin, but he walked quickly, as if he was afraid that time was slipping away. The puppy was so light in his hands that Artyom was afraid to squeeze it too hard. When he knocked on Maria's door, It was already past midnight. He opened it. Her face was sleepy, but her eyes immediately flashed with alarm. Artyom, what happened? She asked, tightening the scarf on her shoulders. He spoke haltingly about Lyra, about the puppy, about what he found in the barn. Maria listened in silence, her gaze growing heavier. When he finished, she said, "You threw her out, Artyom. She died because of you." Her words were like a blow. He wanted to object, but he couldn't. Maria sighed, picked up the puppy and examined him. He was weak, but tenacious. "Like Lyra," she said. Her voice softened. She brought warm milk, made an improvised bottle from a rag and began to feed the puppy. Artyom watched the baby swallow greedily and felt something break in his chest. He couldn't undo what he had done to Lyra, but this puppy was his chance. Maria looked at him. "You must take the others. They won't survive the night in the barn." Artyom nodded. He knew he had no right to refuse. He returned to the barn, carefully picked up the young dog and the other two puppies, wrapping them in an old jacket. The dog did not resist, as if she trusted him. He brought them to Maria, and she helped to settle them in a warm room next to the stove. "Lyra was special," Maria said, looking at Artyom. "She's not just a dog. I saw in you what you yourself had long forgotten. Don't let her down now." Artyom was silent. He looked at the puppies, at their mother, and felt his determination growing. He didn't know how to take care of them, but he had to try for Lear's sake, for his own sake. Morning came to the village, quietly, as if frost had frozen not only the earth, but time as well. Artyom sat in Maria's house, looking at the three puppies, sleeping, cuddled up to their skinny mother. Their tiny bodies trembled in their sleep, and the mother, whom Artyom mentally called Nadia, lay calmly. Her eyes followed his every movement. Maria bustled about at the stove, making tea, but her gaze kept returning to Artyom. He felt that gaze, as if it were not my reproach, but there was no malice in it, only tired understanding. "You must decide what to do with them," Maria said, placing a mug of steaming tea in front of him. "I can help for a day or two, but I have enough of my own worries. Chickens, cats, a vegetable garden, and now you are responsible for them." Artyom nodded, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked at the puppies and saw Lyra in them, her devotion, her sacrifice. He couldn't just leave like he had done with her. But how could he take care of 4 dogs when he could barely handle himself? He returned to his house, carrying Nadia and the 2 puppies in an old crate lined with rags. The first puppy, the one Lyra had brought to the porch, was left with Maria. He was too weak to endure another journey. Artyom settled Nadia and her babies in the corner of the room, next to the stove, where Lyra had slept before. He found an old bowl, poured some water and placed it in front of Nadia. She looked at him with cautious gratitude, licked the water, and lay down, protecting the puppies. Artyom sat down on a chair and looked at them for a long time. His house, always empty and cold, was now full of life, weak, vulnerable, but alive. He remembered how Lyra had lain there, her breathing mixing with the creaking of the floorboards. He remembered how he had ignored her, how he had brushed off her loyalty. And now, these puppies, this young dog, they were her last message. "You are still Human, she seemed to be saying. But was he? The day dragged on slowly. Artyom tried to keep himself busy, chopping wood, fixing the leaking roof, but his thoughts returned to Lyra. He went out into the yard, where her tracks in the snow were still visible, now covered with a fresh layer. He knelt down and touched the place where she had lain. I didn't want to, he whispered, and his voice broke. I did. And no. But the words rang empty. He knew, he saw her weakness, her old age. But he chose anger over compassion. By evening, Artyom decided that he had to bury Lyra. He couldn't leave her body in the house, but he also couldn't wanted her to remain in the cold earth without a proper farewell. He took a shovel and went to the old birch tree at the edge of the plot, the same one, under which Svetlana liked to sit in the summer, reading books. Lyra often lay nearby, getting dirty in the sun. This was her place. Artyom dug despite the frost that stung his hands. The ground was hard, but he did not stop. Blow of the shovel was like an attempt to dig wine out of himself. When the hole was ready, he brought Lyra, wrapped in Svetlana's old blanket. He laid her in the ground, carefully, as if he were afraid to hurt her. You were better than me, he said, quietly. Better than I will ever be. He filled the hole, and with each clod of earth he felt something settle in it, becoming heavier, but also cleaner. He placed a simple wooden cross over the grave, carved from an old board. Was all he could give. Returning to the house, Artyom noticed that Nadia was looking at him differently. Her eyes, previously wary, were now softer. He crawled closer and laid her head on his lap. Artyom froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone had sought his warmth. He stroked her gently, feeling her fur warm his palm. The puppies squeaked, and Nadia returned to them. But that moment remained with Artyom. He was not alone. The next day he went to Maria to pick up the first puppy. He greeted him with a tired smile. He's stronger, she said, handing him over. But he needs more than milk. They all need warmth, food, care. Are you ready, Artyom? He didn't answer. He didn't know if he was ready, but he took the puppy and went home, feeling it tremble in his arms. At home, he began to learn. He cooked porridge, mixed it with milk that he bought at the village store. He fed Nadia, made sure the puppies were warm. It was unusual to take care of someone other than himself. But every time he looked at the puppies, he saw Lyra, her eyes, her loyalty, her sacrifice. He could not let her down again. One night, when the puppies were sleeping and Anad was lying next to him, Artyom heard a strange sound outside the window. It was not the wind, but something alive, a weak whine. He took a flashlight and went out. In the darkness by the fence, he saw another dog, old, thin, with frostbitten paws. She looked at him, trembling, and Artyom realized that it was not chance. The village was empty, but life still found its way to his house. Maybe Lyra sent them. He didn't know, but he opened the door and called, "Come here." The dog limped into the house. Artyom settled her by the stove, gave her water and food. She was weak, but her eyes were alive. He named her Vera. Nadia accepted her as if she were an old friend, and the puppies, as if sensing a new guest, squealed louder. Artyom looked at this strange new world in his house and felt something changing inside him. He couldn't fix the past, but he could give these creatures a chance, and maybe himself. Maria, having learned about Vera, only shook her head. "You're becoming a shelter, Artyom," she said with a slight smile. "Lyra would be proud of you." These words touched him. He didn't feel worthy of pride, but he felt that he had to continue for the sake of the part of himself that he had almost lost. Nadia, with her thin, but still a stronger body, lay by the fire, guarding her 3 puppies, who had already begun to open their eyes and crawl awkwardly across the blanket. Vera, an old dog with frostbitten paws, settled down nearby. Her breathing was weak but even. Artyom looked at them, and 2 feelings fought in his chest: the weight of guilt that washed over him and the timid hope that he could still fix something. Every day he learned to be better. He got up at dawn, cooked porridge for Nadia and Vera, fed the puppies milk from an old bottle that Maria taught him to use. He cleaned their corner, washed the rags that they had soiled, and even began to talk to them, quietly, awkwardly, as if learning all over again how to be human. "Well, little ones, hold on," he whispered to the puppies when they squealed, demanding food. "You are strong like your mother, like Lyra." Nadia, hearing his voice, raised her head and looked at him with the same devotion that was once in Lear's eyes. But the guilt did not go away. Every night, when the house fell asleep, Artyom went out to the birch tree where he buried Lyra. He stood there in the darkness and talked to her. "I'm trying, girl," he whispered, looking at the wooden cross. "I didn't know how much I needed you." Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he was just silent, but each time he returned to the house with the feeling that he had to continue for her. One morning, Maria came to him, carrying a basket of eggs and a jar of honey. "You're doing well, Artyom," she said, looking around his house. "Now, full of life. But you can't keep them. Well, puppies need a home where they can be taken care of. And Faith needs more than you can give." Artyom frowned. He knew she was right, but the thought of giving the puppies away felt like a betrayal. "I can't," he said. "Lyra entrusted them to me." Maria sighed. "Lyra wanted them to live. Not only did they survive, they lived. You gave them a chance. But now we need to find those who will continue." She told him about a woman named Elena who lived in a neighboring village. Elena was a widow, like Artyom, and her house was full of warmth. She loved animals, kept dogs and cats, and often took in those that no one else wanted. "She's not a veterinarian," Maria clarified, "but she has a good heart. Talk to her." Artyom hesitated. He was afraid that by giving away the puppies he would lose his last connection with Lyra. But he saw how Nadia got tired feeding the babies, how Vera coughed despite the warmth. He knew he had to make a choice. The next day he collected the puppies in a box, wrapped them in a blanket and, taking Nadia on a leash, went to Elena. Vera stayed at home. She was too weak to travel. Elena met him at the gate of her house. Her wrinkled face glowed with kindness. She looked at the puppies, at Nadia, and her eyes filled with warmth. "What kids?" she said, taking one in her arms. "They will survive if you give them a chance." Artyom told her about Lyra, about how she brought the puppy to his porch, about his guilt. Elena listened, silently, without judging. "You made a mistake," she said finally. But you fix it. This is the main thing. She agreed to take 2 puppies, promising to find good homes for them. She examined Nadia and said, she needs to be left here for a while. She needs rest, food, care. But I see that she loves you. She will come back to you when she gets stronger. Artyom nodded, feeling his heart squeeze. He stroked Nadia and whispered, will you come back? And he left, leaving the puppies and their mother in safe hands. Returning home, he took up Faith. Her paws began to heal, but the cough did not go away. Artyom remembered that in the village there was an old paramedic, Ivan, who sometimes helped not only people, but also animals. He carried Faith to him, wrapping him in a warm blanket. Ivan examined the dog, gave her a herbal decoction and said to Sari, she is old, but strong. Give her warmth and love, and she will last a long time. Artyom nodded, feeling how Ivan's words fell on his heart. The days passed and Artyom's house became different. Vera grew stronger, her cough became less frequent, and she began to walk around the yard, carefully sniffing the snow. Artyom made a warm kennel for her, although she preferred to sleep by the stove. He began to talk more often with Maria, who brought him advice and food for Vera. One day she said, have you changed, Artyom? Lyra would have seen it. He didn't answer, but her words warmed him. A month later, Elena brought Nadia. The dog rushed to Artyom, licking his hand, and for the first time in a long time he smiled. You're back, girl, he said, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. Elena told him that the puppies had been found at home. One was with a young family, the other with an elderly woman who had lost her dog. They will be happy, she said, thanks to you and Lyra. Artyom returned home with Nadia and Vera. He looked at them, at their warm eyes, and understood that Lyra had not just saved the puppies, she had saved him. She had shown him that even in the cold of loneliness, you can find light. He sat by the stove, stroked Nadia, then Vera, and whispered, thank you, Lyra, I won't let you down. And that night, for the first time in years, he fell asleep without a pain in his chest. The house was now warm not only from the fire, but also from the life he had chosen to protect.